This is just the beginning.
Welcome to an Axios News Shapers, America's Road Ahead. I'm Mike Allen, a co-founder of Axios, and welcome to my home in Arlington, Virginia. I thought I was going to be in Milwaukee this week for the Democratic National Convention. In fact, I think I forgot to cancel my hotel room, but we're all watching the convention together. I'm calling it the Couch Convention. We'd like to thank the Bank of America for making this News Shaper conversation possible, and we'd like to thank all of you for joining us on Axios.com, on YouTube, and on Axios Twitter account at Axios. You can also follow along at hashtag Axios Events. Our first guest is the mayor of a city where I spent 10 happy years of my life, the mayor of Richmond, Virginia, Mayor Levar, Stoney. Mayor Stoney, welcome to Axios.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Well, thank you for joining me from your home there in downtown, just 3 blocks from City Hall, where you're the youngest person ever to be elected mayor. Before that, you were in Governor Terry McAuliffe's cabinet as a Secretary of Commonwealth, the youngest person in his cabinet, and you were head of the Democratic Party in Virginia, the youngest person to be the head of that. But it turns out that you're not even known for being the youngest everything anymore. You're known, Mayor Stoney, in this summer when racial justice, racial reconciliation is so important to this country. You took on a big battle and won.
Yeah, that big battle, I think, was the removal of Confederate monuments here in the city of Richmond. And I think, you know, Mike, as a person who spent some time here in Richmond, that these Confederate monuments sort of dotted the landscape of the city of Richmond for over 100 years. And when July 1 hit, I exercised my emergency powers to remove all the monuments that were on city-owned property. The only monument that remains on city property is AP Hill because it's a grave site. We're working through that. And then there's one granddaddy statue that still is remaining, and that is the Robert E. Lee on state property. Hopefully by the time we hit the end of 2020, all those monuments will be removed.
Or as they say in Richmond, the Commonwealth's property.
That's right, the Commonwealth's property.
Now, Mayor, what's fascinating was this is obviously a symbolic move of great consequence, something that has dominated the city's summer conversation. But what's fascinating is, like, you're someone who knows how to make government work. And we always like case studies in someone who can find a new way to crack the code. And you actually moved under a public safety provision.
Yes, we have been under a state of emergency for many, many months. First because of the pandemic, and then because of racial strife and social unrest. And so my team came to me after I made the decision that we should consider removal. And that came after there was someone in Portsmouth, a protester who they were trying to remove the monument. The monument fell on the resident. And I just thought that we could not allow for that to happen in the city of Richmond after a number of incidents along Monument Avenue, which is a road of monuments down in the middle of the city of Richmond. So we exercised that authority. We couldn't wait 30 or 60 days because of the fear of injury to people, not due to injury to property. It was to people. And I will say this, recently there was a state senator here in the city in Portsmouth who recently got slapped with a felony charge for the injury of a Confederate monument. And so it's bizarre to me, but I think looking back at it, we did the right thing, and I'm glad those monuments have been removed.
And Mayor Stoney, Politico magazine did a story about you with the very subtle headline, "The Black Millennial Mayor Who Tore Down the City's White Monuments." And just to set the scene for people, this was unthinkable even months ago. There was a time when adding Arthur Ashe to Monument Avenue was seen as a matter of great consequence, let alone subtracting. So just since July 1st, you've taken down what?
Yeah, when I got involved, when I started off as mayor in 2017, we had a conversation. We started having a conversation about the Confederate monuments, and even then, people told me that was the third rail of Richmond politics. Like, why would
And
you
why
even
is
touch
yeah.
this subject?
And Mr. Mayor, why is that the third rail, and why is it so important? As Axios would say, why does it matter?
Well, it matters to me because these monuments are symbols of racism and hate. But for a lot of people, these were seen as symbols of heritage. And when folks would come to me and say, Levar, this is your heritage. And I would look back at them like, this is not my heritage. Your heritage would have me in chains, would have me in bondage. And to me, I think for far too long, Richmonders, Virginians, Americans have been told a false story about the end of the Civil War or why the Civil War occurred. And these monuments were, basically put Black people in their place. They were meant to intimidate. And so folks are really, really attached to monuments, but we should be ashamed of these monuments. We should be ashamed of these symbols as Americans. Not only were those who were glorified by those monuments, or they were traitors, but they were racist as well. And I know in 2020 that my city is better than that. I know my state is better than that, and I definitely know that my country is better than that.
And how many have come down and we've run the pictures in Axios. They literally take a crane and put straps around it and pull it down. How many have they taken down?
Gosh, I couldn't keep count. It was at least 12 to 14 we call pieces of Confederate iconography. We took down all the monuments along Monument Avenue that included one to Maury, to Stonewall Jackson, which was a grand monument, one to Fontaine Maury as well, Jefferson Davis, the symbols we removed, protesters removed him early on. There were a couple scattered in parks throughout the city. There was one in Churchill and Lippy Hill Park. There were a number of them. And it was a process because, we could not find any contractor willing to actually touch those monuments. That's how ingrained into the culture of these Confederate monuments are, that in multiple states throughout the Mid-Atlantic region and in the South, we couldn't find anyone who would be willing to touch it. We had to actually contract it with someone out of state, out of Connecticut and other places. But now that now that they've been removed, I think the city can now begin the process of healing and coming together and unifying behind what makes us who we are today. And that's not the capital, the former capital of the Confederacy, but also the capital for compassion, the capital for inclusion. That's who we want to be. We got to be a community of love. And I think the process has now begun.
Mayor Stoney, let's pull back the camera. Something that's been very fascinating as the Democratic Convention opens is that the party, in addition to talking about the pandemic and the recession and the post office, the party's been talking a lot about this racial reckoning, the racial reconciliation, the issue of racial justice that was touched off with the tragic death of George Floyd and has become the biggest civil rights movement in American history, the most participants of any movement ever. How do you see the arc of that? Do you worry about attention spans, momentum? How do you see the months ahead?
Yeah, you are correct, Mike. This has been a racial reckoning. I don't think folks thought that this would ever arrive at their front doors, but it has. And now I see Black Lives Matter posters and yard signs that dot areas of the city, which I've never thought would before, in parts of areas of the city where a lot of my white residents live, just to show that Black and brown people have allies in this fight. And I think folks see that the injustices that have been the lived experience of so many Black and brown people, this really has shined a light on all of that. However, I would say that the proof will be in the pudding, whether or not this has been a racial reckoning. Well, let me tell you why I say that. If the gaps between the divides and gaps between Black and brown people and white people still remain in 2030, then all of this was for naught. Then we missed our moment. So we have to reduce those gaps between black and brown people and white people, right? We got to reduce the gaps in education, in housing, in healthcare. If those disparities still remain in 2030, then we really, truly miss our moment. So this has to be more than about removing monuments. We should do the hard work of ripping out systemic racism in every system out there: healthcare, housing, education. And that to me will be the test of whether or not this has been a true reckoning on race.
Mayor Stoney, I know what the name of your first book should be.
What is that?
Don't miss your moment.
Don't miss your moment. And I think I keep saying that to not just those who are demonstrators, Mike, but also to those who are elected officials, who are policymakers in this moment. We can't miss this moment. We have to make hay when the sun is shining. That's what my grandma used to say.
Mayor, there's a very subtle message on my screen that says wrap up. It's now in all caps, but I'm going to cheat for 1 second. And it was as we say goodbye, when you were at Tabb High School in Yorktown, Virginia, you were the quarterback, so you were cool, but you were also in the library reading what?
Probably reading biographies of presidents and political leaders.
And what's one thing that the young people watching us can learn from what you've learned about the lives of presidents?
Let's say I compare it to being a quarterback. Sometimes you're going to throw some interceptions, but you got to be able to get back in the game when you throw an interception, when you turn the ball over. And so everybody has their own story, but you have to be resilient, right? You're going to face many challenges. You just got to get back up and keep on moving.
Mayor Stoney, wishing you many completions, and thank you for joining Axios News Shapers.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Mayor Levar Stoney, for coming to us from Richmond, Virginia. We'd like to thank the Bank of America for making this conversation possible. And now we're going to see a quick video from the Bank of America.
The racial and economic disparities that have long existed in this country have only been widened by the coronavirus and amplified by the most recent acts of injustice. People around the world are coming together with greater urgency to demand action. At Bank of America, we know we all have a role to play to overcome the very real consequences of systemic racism and inequity. This includes individuals, governments, nonprofits, and the private sector. Racial equality and economic opportunity are deeply connected. That's why Bank of America has committed $1 billion over 4 years to address critical gaps in affordable housing, access to healthcare, employment and job skills, and the resources small businesses need to succeed. We can do more, and we need to do more now to further advance racial equality and economic opportunity for all.
Welcome back to Axios News Shapers, America's Road Ahead. We're honored to have with us one of the speakers at the Democratic Convention, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, former mayor of Newark, who walked the walk with your constituents there in Brick Tower. And Senator Booker is joining us from his home in Central Ward in Newark. That's the real deal. Senator Booker, welcome to Axios.
It's great to be on with you this morning. Thank you.
Senator Booker, no matter what happens in this election, one of the events of this year, one of the milestones of our time is going to be the selection of Senator Kamala Harris of my home state of California for the ticket. And you used a phrase that really stuck in my mind. You said that with the choice of Senator Harris, there's a lot of people who feel seen.
I tell you, I think that we are such a spectacular America, and there are so many people every day that are just an integral part of our being. In fact, we started calling many of them essential workers, but yet when you talk to essential workers, they felt like they've been overlooked or looked down upon for years. And so here you have a moment in American history where we haven't seen at that high level of our politics, Black women. And to have this woman who is the child of a Jamaican, a child of someone from India, a woman of color, rise up. I think it's this feeling of affirmation that for the first time since the founding of this nation, I can look up at that historic ticket and see myself. And I talked to a lot of my friends about that movie, Waiting to Exhale. I think a lot of folks exhaled at that moment and said, yes, this is a nation that sees me, values me, knows that there are people like me who have incredible worth and contributions to make.
As Senator Booker, one of the passion projects that you've had as long as you've been in public life is policing in America. And I would say that this summer we've had a decade's worth of change in awareness in what's happening. And a question that we had from a viewer is, what can people in cities like Richmond, where I used to live, and where we had the Mayor Stoney on, what can people in a city like Richmond do to reform public safety and police?
Well, I think the first thing we should all be demanding is there's just basic levels of accountability. This role where people literally have the power to take life. We should have the highest levels of accountability, public accountability. One of the things on the law that I helped write, or the bill I helped write with Senator Harris on the Senate side and great leaders like Karen Bass on the House side, was something that would just make sure that every police department in America had to answer to accountability, had to open their data to let people know, are there racial disparities in the traffic stops that are being made? What are the uses of force and the breakdown and those uses of force? So I just think folks should demand, number one, transparency. So there's that accountability. They should know that when things go wrong, when someone breaks the law, that they can be held accountable through the court systems, whether they're civil or criminal, and that there should be certain basic standards that no matter where you are in America, that we should not be a country that allows these carotid holds, these choke holds, or the no-knock warrants in these nonviolent drug cases where somebody could barge into your house in plain clothes in the middle of the night. You don't know who they are. That is a recipe for danger for both those officers as well as obviously for the people in these homes. And so that's the first thing. There should be fundamental accountability, transparency, and key standards. But as a guy who struggled with these issues, I led a police department here in Newark, and we had highs and lows and learned together in many ways as a community about how to make a difference. The most important thing I would tell folks is to get your city and your community to expand their view of what creates safe neighborhoods. And that, as a head of an FBI told me when I first got elected and asked him, we were talking about gang violence. I said, how do we solve this? And he looked at me like I asked him a silly question. He's like, we don't solve this problem. In other words, this is not a problem you solve with law enforcement. It's a problem you treat the symptoms of with law enforcement. That we need to get to more deeper, more beloved communities throughout our country where we treat mental illness not with jail or prison, but with help and healthcare. Those kind of things ultimately reduce violence, make us safer, but more importantly, elevate human well-being and human flourishing.
And Senator Booker, what do you see as the arc of this racial reckoning? I mentioned how fast there's been progress in awareness and in action. What do you think is the likelihood that continues, and what are your concerns about that momentum?
So you have to understand, I will always start from the bedrock principle that people are good, that we are ones that want to have a beloved community, that want to have decency and kindness be the governing virtues. And if you believe in the fundamental goodness of people, then when we expand our circles of empathy and our moral imagination, there is tremendous possibility for a racial reconciliation, for redemption, and for justice. But the problem is often people think that arc that you talk about is just going to inevitably bend towards justice. It has never been the case. All of us have a moral affirmative obligation to be arc benders. And so this is something we have to grapple with because we're dealing with hundreds of years of history where the grain is cut tragically in the other direction. We now have to take affirmative actions to be the kind of folks that create that racial reconciliation. And it's not easy. It means uncomfortable conversations, uncovering difficult truths, and making hard decisions to heal and to come together and again, to move down that road of redemption.
Be an arc bender. That's a great word. And Senator Booker, a related issue where you've been a leader is on the racial wealth gap. And you've talked a lot about intergenerational poverty. You have a solution to it. You talk about baby bonds, and this is basically a trust fund the federal government would set up for every newborn. What is the key, Senator Booker, to having action on that? And how much would that really change these structural issues that your constituents, all Americans, face?
I know we call it the racial wealth gap, but I really wish that we would call it also the American wealth gap. In other words, when you have large poverty concentrated disproportionately amongst African Americans, for example, it actually leads to the deficit of us all. In fact, if you have Black families have the same access, Black entrepreneurs, to capital that white entrepreneurs have, you would increase our overall economy, according to a McKinsey study, between $1 and $1.5 trillion. And so we have to address this wealth gap for the benefit of us all. And so practical policy solutions like baby bonds, which would actually, as Columbia University says, virtually collapse the racial wealth gap amongst young people going out there. It's actually something that we have the capability of doing. We use our tax code now to shift between $600 billion and $700 billion of wealth upwards. But it's just going to take getting the political will. It's just going to take all of us deciding as a society how our policies reflect our values. And so I'm hoping we have more awareness about this crisis, this problem of the wealth gap, and more of a commitment to doing something about it.
Now, Senator Booker, you're going to be addressing the Democratic National Convention from right there in your home. A little sneak peek. If people remember one thing from your remarks, from your presentation, you hope it will be what?
I hope it's that we all have a responsibility in our nation to bring about a revival of civic grace, that we've got to begin to heal our country, bring people together, and affirm the truth of who we are. This election's not a referendum on one guy in one office. It's ultimately a referendum on who we are and who we are to each other.
Senator Booker, as we say goodbye, before you got fancy with your Rhodes Scholarship and your Yale Law degree, you hung out at a little place called Stanford, and you worked on the student newspaper. And having done journalism from the other side, I wonder what you would say about the journalistic profession at this moment, and what change you would wish or hope for.
So I had, it was one of my more valuable experiences working inside of a newsroom and discovering the power of the pen. And so, number one, I think journalism is under assault by not just a president who condemns the media, but market forces that are really threatening what we know as solid, sound, reliable journalism. And so I just hope for people in that profession is that they persist, that they continue to write from head and heart, and that we in America have, again, find some way to bring about a flourishing of trusted news, trusted reporting, and understand that fundamental to any democracy is a thriving press, thriving journalism, and people that are committed to making that sacrifice to be in that profession and always tell the truth, always speak truth to power.
And Senator Booker, the other end of the telescope, as someone who is covered very intensely, you sometimes even have cameras waiting outside for you. What did you learn from being on our side of the screen, the pen, the recorder?
I think that I just will go back to what I said earlier. We all need to extend more grace to each other. We all need to be governed by a moral compass of goodness. And it's what I learned just being around John Lewis in often very high pressure situations. And I watched the consistency in which he was a good person. He even talked about trouble in that way, good trouble. And I just hope that, and in fact, I know there's a Stanford researcher who actually showed the viral power of decency, of kindness, that when it's witnessed by others, it actually affects their behavior. We need to all be like John Lewis, and I know it's hard, but he would be the first person to tell you that he was human. And I hope we all strive in our writing about other people to decency. And I'll tell you, I did my whole campaign trail trying to talk about the virtues and values. And I had an experience I've never had before is, unfortunately, I can remember the handful of articles that have been written about me in the mainstream that I felt were just unfair, mean-spirited, and wrong. And one of the journalists, and I won't mention their name, but they followed me throughout my presidential campaign and then wrote me a long note of apology that the years ago when they wrote one of those articles that so hurt that I just thought, I don't mind taking criticism. God knows I'm not perfect and make mistakes, and we all should be criticized who are in the public sphere. But to see the decency with which they took the moment to say, hey, I didn't come at you with the right spirit. That it's a private conversation, but that so moved me to see the decency in the journalists. And so I think when we all take a step out of our ego corners and extend ourselves to others with that spirit, we'll all be better off because of it, and we'll elevate the dialogue and the debate if it's centered and grounded in a respect and affirmation for the humanity and for the dignity of those that we encounter in our lives.
That is a remarkable move by that journalist. And if you've only had a handful of bad stories, I would say you're winning. Senator Booker, thank you for joining Axios Newspapers, and we will see you in prime time.
Thank you very much. And just a correction, if you make it addend me, I've had a lot of bad stories that I didn't like, but unfair ones from mainstream journalists, not that many. And so I'm grateful to be on with a very fair journalist right now. And just thank you for this time to be with you. And I appreciate you and I standing here and showing that bald is beautiful.
Amen. I tell people I save a lot of money on product. So thank you very much, Senator Booker. Have a great day.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Bank of America for making these conversations possible. And now we'll see a quick video from the Bank of America.
The racial and economic disparities that have long existed in this country have only been widened by the coronavirus and amplified by the most recent acts of injustice. People around the world are coming together with greater urgency to demand action. At Bank of America, we know we all have a role to play to overcome the very real consequences of systemic racism and inequity. This includes individuals, governments, nonprofits, and the private sector. Racial equality and economic opportunity are deeply connected. That's why Bank of America has committed $1 billion over 4 years to address critical gaps in affordable housing, access to healthcare, employment and job skills, and the resources small businesses need to succeed. We can do more, and we need to do more now to further advance racial equality and economic opportunity for all.
Welcome back to Axios News Shapers. Our next guest is the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy. He's the former ambassador to Germany under President Obama. He's chairman of the Democratic Governors Association and co-chairman of the Democratic National Convention. Governor Phil Murphy, welcome to Axios.
Mike, good to see you. Good to be with you again.
So you know Joe Biden well. He campaigned with you when you were running for governor. I guess that turned out. What's it like to campaign with Vice President Biden?
He's an incredible human being. I can't say enough good things about him. He and I really, although we had crossed paths before, but meaningfully started to get to know each other when I was the national finance chair for the Democratic National Committee leading into his election with President Obama. We also spent a significant amount of time when I was U.S. ambassador. In fact, I had some really deep conversations with him actually about potentially running for office without specifics as to the office, but we bonded together in Germany. And as you rightfully point out, Mike, he was a huge asset to me when I ran for governor. He is who he appears to be. He's an extraordinary human being. He's incredibly genuine. He's warm. He's smart. He is from a working family in the middle class, and he exudes that at every step. So I can't say enough good things about him.
Here's what politicians call a fingertip feel, right?
Yeah, the Germans call it Fingerspitzengefühlen, a classic long German word, but it captures it. It's basically this. And Joe has got that. almost, I have to say, almost singularly on the political stage today of either party. He has just got that in his bones, and you can see it, right? He is who he appears to be, which is one of the great things about him.
Governor Murphy, the reason that you are in Middletown instead of Milwaukee is because of the pandemic. And New Jersey, after a very hard time, is a COVID success story. What would you tell other states who hopefully are on the road to success, but sure aren't there?
Yeah, Mike, even I wouldn't say we're there yet. I have to caution that we've made an enormous amount of progress. The toll has been also enormous, over 14,000 confirmed fatalities from COVID-19, which is unfathomable. But to your point, we are, as we sit here this week, we are meaningfully, dramatically better than we were, and we're probably at the front end of states in America right now. But this thing is insidious, and we're dealing with it still every single day. I would say, as a general matter, and my nose is pressed completely against the New Jersey glass, so I'm not trying to get in the middle of other states' affairs. But I think the following: I don't think you can be. I think history will not judge you harshly if you overcorrect, if you are too aggressive with this virus. I think we will all be judged, on the other hand, very harshly if you undercorrect, if you underestimate it. That's the one piece of advice I think we've learned the hard way, and I think we all have to learn. So when we talk about universal masks, when we talk about being slower to open indoor activities, when we talk about no house parties that are indoors, we mean it. We can't be strong enough on any of that, and we all have to continue to be.
Because, Governor, you had to do a little rollback.
Yeah, we had to listen. We had to stop at the edge of going to indoor dining, and then we had to turn down the amount of folks that we're allowing to gather indoors for any reason, but for faith and First Amendment activities. Yeah, our numbers started to get soft, Mike, and they're still, listen, we're still printing many hundreds of positive tests a day. Now, we do have an overwhelming testing capacity, among the best in America, so our positivity rate is, plus or minus 2%, which means 98% of the folks getting tested are negative. But still, we're still in the middle of it, and we can't let up on this thing.
Governor, so social justice is something that's been important to you throughout your career. And after the George Floyd tragedy, you were someone who was out there. You were literally marching. You were on the front page of every newspaper in New Jersey. What did you learn by being actually in the street?
Yeah, as you point out, this has been a passion of mine for a long time. I'm proud to say, a former national board member of the NAACP. And our administration from day one has taken a whole range of steps toward social justice and trying as best we can to erase the stain of racism. Listen, being there, I went back to back, Mike, interestingly, from a community overwhelmingly of color to an overwhelmingly white community, back to back, a march and a vigil. And I was really struck by the reach, this tragedy of George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. The list sadly goes on and on. I was incredibly taken aback by the rainbow spectrum of folks who have come out and said, we're mad as heck, we're not going to take it anymore. In this first year of the 5th century since slavery came to our shores, enough. It can't be just words. We must take action. And that strikes me even to this day. And it's incumbent on us, leaders, but all of us, to make sure we actually take those actions.
Now, Governor, with your hat of co-chairman of the Democratic National Convention, you've spent months figuring out how this was going to be pulled off. We have this mix of videos and remote appearances and virtual control room. It's a little awkward. How have you felt about how the plane actually flies now that it's out there?
I'm incredibly impressed, Mike, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back as a co-chair, because Tom Perez and the Biden folks deserve all the credit. I think it's incredibly impressive. I said to somebody yesterday, I think if this convention were in March, and we were literally going from an old normal into an abrupt new holy cow, we're going to have a convention that's going to be virtual. I think that would have been a lot of sticker shock around that. But we've all gotten used to the way I'm communicating with you right now. This is our lives these days, whether we like it or not. It is what it is. And I think the Democratic National Committee, Team Biden, Team Harris, I think they've done an extraordinary job capturing this moment. The theme is uniting America. We've never needed that more. Enough of the us versus them. Let's all find that common ground. And I think you're seeing it, even though it's virtual, you're seeing it exude this week with the convention.
And Governor, as we say goodbye, you've been at the forefront of some of the biggest changes in the world. We also have some small changes going on in our lives. And I understand that in the Murphy household, movie night is back in the shutdown era.
There's no question, particularly in the first, when it was too cold to sit out in the back porch. We were all movies 6-7 nights a week. And so we've run through the Bond movies, the Bourne movies, the Star Wars movies, the Mission Impossibles. We've gotten some new ones, some old ones. It's been, the silver lining has been we've spent a lot of quality family time together.
Well, Governor, congratulations on the convention, and thank you for joining Axios.
Thank you for having me, Mike. Take care.
And now for our big finish, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, our guest was the U.S. Secretary of Labor. They headed the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. Tom Perez, Mr. Chairman, welcome to Axios.
Great to be with you.
So you are the rare Democrat who's actually in Milwaukee, and you have a real personal connection to Milwaukee.
That's correct. I got married here about 32 years ago. Milwaukee's a great city. They've been a great host. We've had unprecedented circumstances, and they've been a great partner throughout. And we are still anchored here in Milwaukee. I look forward to this entire week in Milwaukee talking about the values of the party and, frankly, the values of the great state of Wisconsin as well.
Now, Mr. Chairman, you've been in the Nerve Center. They call it the spaceship. Tell us what it's like inside the Democratic National Convention spaceship.
Well, it feels like there's about 100 television screens that are really quite big, and the entire production is anchored right here in Milwaukee. So when you see somebody talking live from another city, that is being processed through the Nerve Center here in Milwaukee. So while we have people talking from everywhere, this is where the action is at right here. And so it's exciting to be here. The state that has the most representation of speakers is the great state of Wisconsin, and all of those speakers are obviously speaking live. We have a number of speakers who have spoken live or will speak live earlier this week. Senator Sanders, for instance, that was a live feed. So there's a lot of moving parts, and the thing about it is we prepared for this. We prepared early. We knew that we had to account for every single circumstance, and we did exactly that.
Now, Mr. Chairman, as we think ahead to November, there's a lot of conversation about voter access, voter rights, and this is no abstract issue for you. As a young lawyer, you actually studied it, and you could be a little bit of a fact checker on this topic.
Well, absolutely. I mean, voter protection is a staple in what we're doing here in the run-up to November. We've never had a more robust voter protection operation than we do now. And the we in that sentence is the Biden campaign, the DNC, our partners in the Democratic ecosystem. And the reason for this is that Donald Trump has been very, very clear. I'm going to try to make it harder for eligible people to vote. They don't want everyone to vote. They want less people to vote. That's their only formula for success, is suppressing the vote. And that is why we are moving aggressively to make sure that the mail system is able to do its job. We are using litigation. We're using organizing tools. We're making sure that we tell everybody, make a plan early, go to iwillvote.com, check your registration status. the first day that you can register or get your absentee ballot if you choose to vote absentee. Do it the first day, not the last day. Leave nothing to chance. Make that plan and make sure you get 10 other people to do the same thing.
And you've actually studied how rare or common voter fraud is.
Well, I litigated a case in Texas involving this, and I don't have the precise data in front of me, but basically what we were able to demonstrate to the court, and we won the case that I was talking about, it involved the Texas voter ID law, which was absolutely designed to make it harder for African Americans and Latinos to vote. And there were literally millions and millions of votes. And you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than you do to find a case of voter fraud in the record that we were looking at. And so these claims from the other side about fraud, those claims in and of themselves are fraudulent. We know what's going on here, and we're not going to allow it to happen. And that's why we've built such a robust operation. It's really shameless. I mean, let's have a battle about in the marketplace of ideas. We believe that healthcare should be a right for all. Republicans don't. So let's have that debate, and then let's make sure we maximize turnout from eligible voters. I welcome that debate, and I welcome having maximum turnout. I think when we do that, that's democracy at work.
Mr. Chairman, we've been talking about the most literal ground truth, that is get your ballot early. Let's pull back the camera and think about the times America's in. You talk about this as a kind of LBJ moment.
Well, this is not only an LBJ moment, but it's really a John Lewis moment. John Lewis said that the right to vote is the most impactful nonviolent activity that one can do to form a more perfect union. So John Lewis gave us his marching orders. And I think about John Lewis every single day. He was a hero of mine. I had the privilege of spending time with him. And we are going to, as Democrats, make sure that we carry out those marching orders of John Lewis. And the key here is people need to have choice. We talk a lot about vote by mail, but people must have choice. If you want to vote in person, we've got to make sure that the precincts are there and that the precinct workers are trained and everything is safe. If you want to vote early, we should maximize, not minimize, the number of days of in-person early voting. Why? Because in the world of a pandemic, if you have 21 days of early voting, you can practice social distancing and minimize lines. And then if you want to vote at home or vote by mail, vote no excuse absentee, those things, we need to make sure they're easier, not harder. Make sure, for instance, that you have a stamped envelope so you don't have to go get an envelope. Make sure that as long as that ballot is postmarked by Election Day, that ballot is counted. When you put in place provisions like this, then you are enabling people to exercise their right to vote. That's what it's all about. And these attacks are so unconstitutional, they're so undemocratic, and I think the American people are having none of it. We've seen lights out turnout in 2017, 18, and 19, and that's how we've won. And that's frankly what scares the bejesus out of Donald Trump, because voters keep turning out. And they're going to continue to, because he's been chronically ineffective, and because we have a leader in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that are bringing our nation together. We're practicing the politics of addition. Addition beats subtraction every single day of the week, and that's what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are doing.
Mr. Chairman, my penultimate question: what do you think we've been educating people that we have a voting season now rather than an election day. What do you think is the likelihood that you will know who the next president is when you go to bed the morning of November 4th, the morning after Election Day?
Well, I'm not sure, because it'll depend on how each state is and the pace with which they count their ballots. But I'll tell you, my goal is to make sure that we maximize the opportunity for everyone to participate in the electoral process. The days of everybody votes on the same day in the middle of a week, that's like Leave It a Beaver land. That's very, very 20th century. we ought to make it easier for people to vote. And that's exactly what I've just described. And when you allow this, yes, it might take a little bit longer to count all the votes, but I think that is a small price to pay to have participatory democracy. When we make it easier to vote, I mean, the notion that it's the first Tuesday in November, like, people have to work for a living. People have parental responsibilities. Why don't we make it easier for people to vote, not harder? And so if it takes a little bit longer than Tuesday night when I go to bed to figure out who won, I think that is a small price to pay for ensuring that everybody can participate.
And Mr. Chairman, my last question for you. You're there in Milwaukee on the ground. What kind of difference would you say that it's made there having Senator Kamala Harris on the ticket?
Oh, it's been a huge difference. Look, I mean, since she was announced by the vice president, our energy levels, which were already pretty darn high, they're now off the charts. I mean, this is the dream team. This is history making on so many levels, shattering that gender glass ceiling, shattering this racial glass ceiling. And here's the thing, though, and I've heard this from many people. This is historic, but it will be only a historical footnote unless we win. I love the fact that we had Geraldine Ferraro on the ticket. I'm so grateful for Shirley Chisholm's groundbreaking work. Those were remarkable developments. We want to get across the finish line, and that's what I hear the most. And Kamala has just provided such a jolt of additional energy on top of an already pretty energized electorate on our side. And again, as you have seen throughout the course of this week at our convention, we welcome everyone. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to continue to attract hardcore Democrats, independents, Party of Lincoln Republicans. We are building a remarkable coalition of people who understand that we need to return common decency to the White House. We need competence in the White House. We need to build back better, and we can do it best with Joe Biden.
And Mr. Chairman, as we say goodbye and send you back to the spaceship, you know Wisconsin, you know Milwaukee, what's something that you're going to eat or drink before you come back to the swamp?
Spotted Cow. That is one of the best beers here in Wisconsin. You can't buy it outside Wisconsin. And oftentimes when I'm at the Milwaukee airport, and this is in the pre-COVID days, you go through the magnetometer and then you go to the store there and I get a little bit of Spotted Cow to put in my refrigerator back in my home in Maryland.
I look forward to the day when we can raise a glass together. Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining
Amen.
Axios.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. We'd like to thank the Bank of America for these conversations. Thank you for joining us for this Axios News Shaper, America's Road Ahead. We'd love for you to check out our podcast, Axios Today, every morning, just 10 minutes with our host, Naila Boodoo. And we look forward to seeing you throughout the convention on our convention hub. And I will see you on Axios.com.